In medieval Europe, mystery wasn't a genre, it was a way of life. From a boy who seemed dropped into the world from nowhere, to a book no one could read even 600 years later, to a pair of green skinned children who appeared, claiming to be from a world beneath ours. These are three of the strangest mysteries I've covered from the Middle Ages. So stick around, and I think you're going to enjoy these gripping stories. Confusion and curiosity gripped the townspeople as a mysterious figure emerged. It was May 1828, and in the early dawn hours of Nuremberg, a boy, barely more than a shadow, had appeared out of nowhere, dazed and stumbling, clutching a letter in one hand and wearing a look of utter desperation. At first glance, the boy looked odd. His clothes didn't fit him. It was like they didn't even belong to him. He looked like a beggar. But it was the boy's behavior that was truly unsettling to the townspeople. The boy would shuffle and sway, his eyes wide and confused. It was like he had never seen another person or a town before. When people tried to talk to him, the boy was unable to speak, but it didn't mean he wasn't making noise. He would make clicking sounds and repeat the same noises as if he was trying to copy or mimic those around him. It was said the boy kept repeating the phrase, "horse, horse," over and over again. There was zero indication that he understood the meaning of anything that was coming out of his mouth. And at times it was said that he'd actually hold his hands out in front of him, staring at his own fingers in bewilderment. It was like he saw his hands for the first time right there in front of him. Now, things got strange over here because he had with him a strange letter. It looked like he'd been carrying it around for some time as it was completely tattered. The letter the boy clutched added layers and layers to the mystery that was unfolding in front of everyone. In careful, formal handwriting, it was addressed to the captain of the Nuremberg cavalry. There was a strange request that the boy be taken in and cared for because he knew nothing of the outside world and had only been fed bread and water for his entire life. The young boy had never seen another human face, and his entire life had been nothing more than one of shadows and silence. The letter would go on to explain that the boy was kept hidden for his own protection, and that if somebody in town was unable to take him in and hide him, that the boy should be put out of his misery. Now, the letter gave no names, no clues to its origin. This sparked wild rumors, accusations, and absolute fascination by the entire town as they tried to figure out this mystery. Unbelievably, things only get crazier from here. We're talking espionage, secret codes, and royal conspiracies. You're gonna want to stick around for this story because I promise you it's not gonna disappoint. All right, I just want to thank you guys for joining back in on this episode. Today we're gonna be covering a really interesting story. I don't want to give too much away, but I think you're gonna like it. This channel could really use your support. If you're able to share this episode with somebody, it really helps the show. And if you're looking to take the show with you, you can find us also on Apple and Spotify. And with that, I hope I can earn your subscription and keep bringing you stories that are fully assembled right out of the box, not like that IKEA furniture you've been trying to put together for the last 3 Thanksgivings. With that, let's move on. Now, to understand the weight of this boy's arrival and what it meant to the villagers, we gotta look a little bit deeper. The young boy's name was Kaspar Hauser, and his sudden appearance was more than just a spectacle. It would appear that Kaspar was a teenage boy somewhere around the age of 16. 16 years before his appearance, a rumor was already swirling around Europe about a missing royal heir. The source of this story was not far from Nuremberg, and it was from the house of the Duke and Duchess of Baden, a prominent noble family. The Duke's wife, Stephanie de Beauharnais, who happens to be an adopted daughter of Napoleon Bonaparte, gives birth to a son. But the infant's fate soon grew murky, because rumors would circulate that the child died shortly after its birth, yet some believed otherwise, essentially suspecting that the baby was hidden away due to the political tension within the royal family and to basically protect him from threats during the turbulent post-Napoleonic era. Now, this was a time in history where kind of the peasant class turned on the bourgeois class or the rich people, and if you were royal or if you were from a kind of a wealthy background, people kind of scared and trying to hide that from the public in order to ensure their survival. So it became a time of actually like a lot of hidden royalty. So for years, this story persisted, but there was never any real proof of it. And if anybody was involved in hiding this boy, nobody knew about it. Now, the question obviously was in everybody's head. Could Kaspar, the boy of uncertain origins, be the lost son of Baden? His age matched perfectly. His abrupt, mysterious appearance ignited the hopes of those who believed he was more than just a wayward child. This was a time when royal blood held immense power, and having a hidden heir could not only dethrone somebody that was in power, it could also lead to them being targeted essentially by peasant classes who were kind of not happy with the royals. So of course the question begs, is this the lost child? Did he finally come home? And as you can imagine, some people with less than, I would say, noble interest took note of the boy appearing. The cavalry and the townspeople begin to sort out this mess. They're able to essentially get Kaspar into the care. At first, actually, they sent him to a jail because they didn't know where else to put him, but they were able to put him in the care of a family. I think the guy's last name was Dahmer, not Dahmer like the serial killer, like a more French version, but they were able to get him placed with a family who could care for him. And hopefully they were going to be able to get the story out of Kaspar. Kaspar begins to recover, slowly regaining his strength, slowly regaining his nutrition, and all of a sudden he's starting to become more confident with it. It said, even though that Kaspar began to recover and had become used to his surroundings, his behavior remained very strange and very childlike. Now, Dahmer and others observed him playing with children's toys, seemingly completely mesmerized the objects. Like he would kind of be stuck on this loop of playing with the toy on repeat, and he would be engaged with it in a way that he almost believed the toy was real. Kaspar would start to speak the language and start to understand more and more. He would be able to start piecing together simple sentences and that were described as kind of halted or stilted, but it seemed that he was getting by. He started to recount some of his story, and he would say that most of his life was spent in a small dark cell where he was kept by an unknown captor who basically visited him only on occasion. He would only offer Kaspar bread and water. Kaspar claimed that from the time he could remember, he had no knowledge of the world beyond his tiny prison. He described his captor as a shadowy figure who always had his face obscured and hidden. He described that the man taught him a few basic phrases and, other than that, left him in complete silence. All he ever knew of the outside world was shadows that he would see passing by. When he would show any curiosity, he was reprimanded and ignored. He was conditioned to live with absolutely no human contact. As the boy's story continues to spread throughout Nuremberg, and the details begin to shift and start to take on a life of their own, where the rumor starts that Kaspar is royal blood. And a lot of people start to really consider the fact that this is the missing prince. Now, Kaspar, not being totally unaware of social norms, and going along with this, and he's not completely aware at this time of the implications. Between his strange story, his strange background story of being a hidden captive boy, and the strange letter that clearly he couldn't have written, with those things combined, like it's natural, people really formulated the idea that he was a royal blood. At the same time, you had a rising part of the population who, upon hearing this, like, nah, this kid's full of shit. And people who are completely convinced that the letter is fake and this story is fake and he's not of royal blood. So it causes right away a little bit of arguing amongst the townsfolk. At the time, it wasn't that uncommon to have hidden hair. Being royal, though it came with power, also came with a lot of danger. And the memory of the French Revolution was fresh in everybody's minds. And sometimes being hidden was the best bet. So it kind of makes sense that if you had a baby and you wanted to protect it, you might put it into hiding. However, as a lot of people would also point out, it's not something you would do to somebody you loved. You wouldn't put them into a kind of dark cell in a basement to be kept there for the entirety of your life. And another feature was that Kaspar is said to have these striking ice blue eyes, which were something linked to the House of Baden and the people in that family. There was enough, anyway, for this rumor to really spread throughout Nuremberg, and it didn't stop there. It actually started to spread like wildfire all over Europe. So with the rumor swirling around town that Kaspar's might be linked to the House of Baden and the missing heir, there's no shortage of characters that start to appear out of the woodwork. Kaspar's story began to spread, and the town's fascination only grew from here. because they also wanted these answers. Whether it be doctors, educators, or nobles, everybody seemed to be turning up. They wanted to unlock the truth and get to the bottom of this mystery. Now, the facts regarding his upbringing seem to remain elusive. Essentially, he claimed to have spent his whole childhood pretty much in complete isolation, locked away in what he described as a cell. Now, this was not corroborated by anyone at the time. Really, the archetype of Kaspar is that of like a feral person or a feral child. He doesn't know any of the social norms, and he's just this underdeveloped kid. As time would go on, he would start to get an equal number of people that believed him and an equal number of people that didn't. A pivotal moment would happen that would throw him into suspicion when he attempted to recount some details of his childhood to a gathering of local officials and curious townsfolk. When he tried to articulate his story, he would stumble awkwardly over certain details, and his account was said to be disjointed and fragmented. It's said that his arrival split the townspeople into two different factions, one being his ardent supporters. This is our prince, this is a missing prince. And then you have the other people saying that this guy is a fraud. You had romantic idealists who fantasize about the grandeur of nobility and the return of the lost son. And then you have the other ones that kind of see this guy as just your local scam fraudster. And caught in between these two groups was the local authorities, who were equally uncertain on how to handle the situations. Some officials regarded Kaspar as a potential threat to social stability and were started to say that his actual presence might start to cause civil unrest. The village would continue to debate his authenticity, and he would continue to strive. He was even eager to learn, and he tries to attend the local schools where teachers marveled at his quick comprehension skills and yet struggled to help him navigate the social aspect of it. For the first time since he had gotten to the village, some of the townsfolk are starting to show him some kindness. They're bringing him gifts, bread, things like that. And he's starting to finally feel like home. However, this would not last long. The atmosphere in Nuremberg shifted dramatically when one evening, Kaspar was at home and he heard something outside. When he went to investigate it, a mysterious figure appeared with silk covering their face and struck Kaspar in an attack that almost took his life. It caused a severe injury that took him days to recover from. The injuries were so severe that he lost his ability to speak for several days after the attack. This moment marked a turning point in Kaspar's story, raising the stakes considerably. It suggested that somebody was intent on keeping his identity hidden. Force lurking in the shadows, something that could be a threat to everyone in town. Who would want to kill Kaspar? The assassination attempt kicked off rumors throughout the town. Now, Kaspar had been staying at the home of a guardian who was appointed by the townspeople, and according to him, an unknown assailant struck him in the forehead with a blunt object. Officials were unable to find the weapon used in the attack, and there was no witnesses. So Kaspar was the only one who saw this go down, and even his memory was pretty shady around it because of the brain injury. This marked a significant turning point in Kaspar's story because it raised the stakes considerably. The failed assassination attempt left everybody on edge, intensifying the intrigue and painting Kaspar as a target in a dangerous game of power, identity, and deception. It had been just over 1 year since his arrival in Nuremberg, and for that entire year, the town was in turmoil. So in the aftermath of the assassination attempt, the pressure on Kaspar escalated. Skeptics began to grow bolder, their whispers turning into outright accusations. Some townsfolk began to conspire, convinced that he wasn't a lost prince, and rather the fraud who needed to be exposed. But Kaspar wasn't going to let a little stabbing hold him back. In the aftermath of the attack, as Kaspar is recovering, you have the rumors circulating that he's a fraud. You also have rumors circulating that he's a royal blood. But for him, all he wanted to do was get better. And many in Nuremberg, and as the rumors continued to circulate, not just Nuremberg, but all of Europe, somebody in England took notice, and a new figure enters the story. An English nobleman named Lord Stanhope. And Lord Stanhope decides, upon hearing the story, he's going to head over to Nuremberg and dig into this himself. Now, he claimed to have heard stories about Caspar's ordeal and he became captivated by it. He had an air of wealth and authority. Stanhope quickly became a regular visitor to Kaspar, showing what appeared to be a genuine concern for Caspar's future. He even starts to offer financial support to Kaspar and promised to do everything in his power to uncover the truth behind his origins. It seemed like Stanhope was a godsend, a man with the resources and influence not only to provide Kaspar with the help and protection that he needs, but also to uncover the answers. Now, it's said that his guardian, Dahmer, was a lot more skeptical of Stanhope's intentions, so over time, it's said that Stanhope's involvement grew deeper and almost even started to become possessive. He began arranging for private investigations, interviewing locals, speaking to officials of Caspar's well-being. He actually ends up arranging for him to move out of his guardian's home and into the home of somebody named Johann Georg Meyer, who was the town's schoolmaster, and this guy was known for his strict demeanor. And Stanhope continued to pledge his dedication to Kaspar, insisting that when the time was right, he was going to bring him back to England to live on one of his estates and essentially give him the best life you could imagine. But as time would go on, there just seemed to be barrier after barrier for Stanhope actually following through on his word. He's like, oh, I'll do it next week. And then the week after that, he's supposed to come back for Kaspar and he's kind of not showing up. For Kaspar, this is just probably confusing, but I mean, for a guy who's living in a cell his whole life, it's probably not the biggest deal in the world. Now, as all of this is happening, tensions in Nuremberg are starting to rise because you've got these two factions that are split on whether this kid's royal blood and what needs to happen. Now those two factions are splitting into some thinking that Stanhope might have nefarious intentions and some thinking that Stanhope needs to take this kid and straighten him out. But as months passed and Kaspar was under the care of his new guardian, Lord Stanhope's promises to bring him back to England just kept falling through. Now, despite the support that Kaspar did have in town, his life would soon take an incredibly dark turn. After he was moved into the house with Myers, Meyer became increasingly impatient with Kaspar's childlike behavior. At first, Meyer may have been intrigued by the boy's inability to communicate properly and his weird behavior, but soon this became a burden to him. And it even started to get to the point where it said Meyer was completely hostile towards Kaspar, became skeptical that Kaspar even had a disability and started accusing him of faking the entire ordeal. Not just to Kaspar, but publicly. He was starting to denounce Kaspar and basically say that this kid's a fraud. So to Kaspar, this shift was completely devastating. Feeling isolated and alone, already feeling like he was in danger. I couldn't imagine what he was going through. The only thing that he had to cling to was that Stanhope might return and actually bring him back to England. But for the time being, he just felt trapped and vulnerable. So as the days would pass, Kaspar became increasingly anxious and withdrawn. His mental and physical state seemed to almost deteriorate kind of back to like when he was arriving. It was exacerbated by all the stress and isolation. On a fateful day in December of 1833, Kaspar receives a mysterious note instructing him to head down to a place known locally as Ansbach Court Gardens. And so Kaspar, unbeknownst to Myers, leaves the house and is seen walking towards the desolate area. This is the last known public sighting of Kaspar until hours later, Kaspar was found staggering from the Ansbach Court Garden, clutching his side, his hands stained with blood. He gasped to those who reached for him, and he said, "A man stabbed me." Despite his grave injury, Kaspar insisted the people who found him take him back to the spot he was stabbed because the attacker had dropped something they needed to find. It was a clue. Too weak to say otherwise, Kaspar is led back into the care of his guardian, Johann Myers, which would turn out to be very unfortunate for him. Despite efforts to save him, Kaspar succumbed to his wound. It was said it took Kaspar 3 days to pass, and during that time, he was continually interrogated by his guardian Myers and officials who kept accusing him of faking the attack. It would seem that Myers' effort to get people on his side in calling this kid out as a fraud had worked, and in those last moments of his life were spent essentially being accused of very horrible things. But Kaspar remained steadfast in his account that he was attacked by an unknown assailant, and the assailant was wearing the same type of face covering as in the previous attack. The town exploded into speculation. Officials launched an investigation, scouring the garden for any trace of the assailant. And it's here, right where Kaspar said it was, the bag containing a note, the clue, the information about who his attacker was. The note was puzzling, a strange combinations of letters and directions that seemed to lead nowhere. So here's what's in the note, and it reads, and I quote, "Hauser will be able to tell you quite precisely how I look and from where I am. To save Hauser the effort, I want to tell you myself where I came from. I come from the Bavarian border, on the river. I will even tell you my name, MLO." Now, the initials MLO themselves were a riddle, and this note seemed to raise more questions than it even answered. Was this actually from Kaspar's assailant, or was this some incomprehensible note that Kaspar wrote as Meyer had accused him of? But the one thing for sure is that this message left both the officials and the townspeople speculating. The note really set people off into a lot of rabbit holes, especially back then. Obviously, there's not any kind of forensic crime investigation going on, but from what they could tell, this thing was written in what was called like mirror writing. Essentially, it was just reverse text. The initials MO have never been comprehensively or definitively connected to anyone or anything that they could think of at that time, so it's not like a super complex code. But again, it makes no sense. In the days after his death, Kaspar's story took on a life of its own. His grave was marked with the words, "Here lies Kaspar Hauser, enigma of his time." His birth was unknown, his death mysterious. In the days following Kaspar's tragic death, an investigation was launched, combing through the gardens and interviewing anybody that had seen Kaspar in those last moments. But despite all these efforts, they're unable to identify any suspects. Now, what starts to get even more weird is Lord Stanhope, who we talked about before. His behavior after Kaspar's death starts to add more layers to this mystery. Now, at the time of the attack, Stanhope was not in Germany. He had already returned to England, leaving Kaspar in the care of Meyer. Now, despite being a person who apparently cared a lot for Kaspar and was so concerned about him, showed surprisingly a lack of urgency to return to Germany after hearing about Kaspar's injury. And at one point, days after Kaspar's death, when he most likely knew about it, sends what seemed to be kind of a distraction letter or a letter to lead authorities off the trail, claiming that he thought Kaspar was still alive and he hadn't heard about his death yet. Now, that was suspicious on its own. But as time would go on, Stanhope starts to turn on the opinions he previously held about Kaspar and starts to paint him in the light the same way that Myers did, as being a fraud, as being somebody that wasn't decent, being somebody that fabricated this entire ordeal of being locked in a cage for his entire life and being from royal blood. So it seems highly suspicious that the Stanhope guy, for whatever his motives are, suddenly shows up into this kid's life with promises of a grand life, lures him out to stay at one of his friend's house, disappears back to England when all of a sudden Kaspar receives a mysterious note telling him to go somewhere, and then Kaspar is murdered. This Stanhope guy changes his story and changes his tune about the whole thing as if to distance himself from the story. It seems a little suspicious, and it also makes me wonder too, like, if this doesn't give more credence to the fact that the real threat to Kaspar was the fact that he might have been royal blood, and somebody out there, whether they were connected to royalty or somebody powerful, didn't want him alive. Maybe it was the royal people in England that wanted to suppress this kid's identity because maybe they were involved in hiding him in the first place. It's completely unclear, not only to the people at the time, it's been completely unclear throughout history, even up to this day. This remains a mystery that is unsolved despite modern efforts to uncover. Now, there's been modern forensic investigations used to try and determine Kaspar's origins, and even some DNA comparisons done show some similarities to noble families. In 2002, some items of what was believed to be Kaspar's clothes with bloodstains on it were tested, and the DNA test came back showing that he is not connected to the House of the Baden. However, after the testing, you have groups of historians and professors that are steadfast that the DNA sample isn't authentic and that it's not actually from Kaspar. So just like 200 years ago, you still have two factions of people arguing that he is and he isn't royal blood. There's nothing definitive showing that his identity or his heritage is linked to nobility. Again, maybe they're trying to keep that on the down low, but some historians and psychologists could just basically believe that this kid may have been suffering a psychological condition that caused problems with his behavior and memory that were the reason that he made up this whole crazy wild story. Maybe he was a poor kid from a rough background and he decides, I'm going to be a prince. So he tries to create this delusion and fantasy, and he's going to either convince himself that it's true or he actually did convince himself it's true. So the point being is that we'll never actually know. But the one thing that I find so interesting about the story is that I guess it really doesn't matter if you're actually of royal blood. If people believe you're royal, then they're going to treat you that way. And if they don't, they don't. Well, that's the story of Kaspar Hauser. It's a mystery that baffles my mind. Up next is the story of the Voynich manuscript. And to this day, it's seriously one of the most intriguing mysteries I've ever come across. And I've gone down the rabbit hole on this multiple times. So enjoy this episode. Imagine a book written in a language so mysterious for 600 years, nobody has been able to uncover its message. The letters twist and curl like they belong to another world, flowing in patterns that defy every known script. Its words seem almost alive, even alien or otherworldly. It hints at secrets that we're not meant to understand. Is it a code from another civilization? Is it a forgotten language or something even stranger? Why does this strange, indecipherable text continue to captivate and haunt everyone who tries to unlock its secrets? This isn't just a story about a book, it's about humanity's obsession with the unknowable. Where did this manuscript come from, and what could it be possibly trying to tell us? This is something you're not going to want to miss out on, so let's get into it. Now, the Voynich manuscript is a strange and singular artifact, a small book, barely larger than a paperback novel, and it only has 240 pages. It's made of vellum, which is crafted from animal skin. Its age shows its weathered and yellowed pages, but its content remains just as vivid as the day they were inked. The text flows from left to right, written in a script entirely unlike anything found on Earth. Cryptographers have studied it for centuries, but nobody's even deciphered a single word. The manuscript isn't just a text. It's also filled with bizarre and ornate illustrations. There are plants that don't exist, there's astronomical diagrams that depict stars and celestial patterns that also defy explanation. Stranger yet are the images of women attached to tubes, laying in green pools and connected to some kind of weird device. It's like they were part of some forgotten medical ritual or alchemical practice. Every page raises more questions than answers. The Voynich manuscript isn't just a historical curiosity. It's a puzzle that continues to taunt us to this day. It's daring us to decipher its secrets, and as we'll see, the obsession often takes a heavy toll on anyone that tries. It's almost as hard as deciphering the YouTube algorithm. Clearly, I haven't figured it out, but with your help, maybe I will someday. If you're able to share this video with somebody that you know, it really helps the channel. If you like what you're hearing, give us a like, maybe even subscribe. And if we haven't earned it, maybe we'll get it on one of the other videos if you check out the channel. Anyhow, I won't waste your time, I'm going to move on. The little bit that we do know of the Voynich manuscript history adds to its mystique. The manuscript was rediscovered in 1912 by a Polish bookseller, Wilfred Voynich, who was captivated by its mystery. But it didn't originate with him. Older records suggest that it was once owned by Emperor Rudolf II of the Holy Roman Empire, a man fascinated with alchemy and the occult. Now, as I mentioned, he came across this thing and he ended up paying 600 gold ducats, which is a staggering amount equal to the cost of a modest castle at the time. He believed it to be the work of Roger Bacon, a medieval English friar and scholar known for his groundbreaking work in science and mysticism. But Rudolf's acquisition was part of his larger obsession with alchemy and the occult. Yet after his death, the manuscript seems to disappear from documented history. reappearing sporadically in incomplete records. People who possessed it during this gap and why it remained hidden are questions that continue to baffle historians. Now, moving forward in time to the reign of Queen Elizabeth I, one of her advisors, John Dee, is said to have taken possession of the book. And Dee's deep involvement in alchemical studies and angelic communication makes him a compelling candidate for its possession. Adding to the intrigue is Edward Kelly, Dee's assistant, who is infamous for fabricating alchemical miracles. Now, some people would theorize that Kelly may have created or forged the manuscript as a ruse to sell to wealthy patrons, like Emperor Rudolph. While there's no direct evidence of this, a possible connection does add a layer of mystery to its journey. The manuscript would disappear again during the end of the 1500s, early 1600s, and wouldn't reappear again until 1912. And the rediscovery of the Voynich manuscript happens at an Italian monastery, discovered by a Polish bookseller for whom it's named after, Wilfrid Voynich. Now, Voynich immediately recognizes its uniqueness and believes it held hidden knowledge capable of reshaping medieval studies. He works tirelessly to decipher its contents, consulting experts and promoting the manuscript as a lost treasure of human history. But even Voynich's efforts couldn't solve this mystery. Despite every attempt Voynich would make during his life, he could never solve this manuscript. And going into more modern times, the carbon dating of the manuscript does show that this thing was created early in the 15th century, proving that Voynich himself couldn't have been some mastermind of a hoax that pulled this off, because during the time that he possessed this book, there was a lot of accusations around forgery. But still, many would wonder how an artifact of such complexity and ambiguity existed at all, and how it's remained hidden on and off over hundreds of years. It just didn't make a lot of sense. And throughout the journey, the Voynich manuscript seems to almost act as a silent observer, untouched for centuries, yet somehow driving the obsession of powerful people who seem to cross its path. Its owners and scholars all share a common trait: an insatiable desire to unlock its secrets, no matter the cost. The manuscript's physical movement tells one story, but its ability to ignite obsession tells another. And as we move forward, we're going to explore some of the theories that have emerged, each attempting to explain this mysterious artifact and what it could be trying to tell us. Now, one of the more grounded theories suggests the Voynich manuscript is a medieval textbook of medical nature. It's specifically focused on women's health. The strange plants could represent herbal remedies, while the women bathing in green pools and connected to tubes might depict treatments or symbolic representations of the body's internal workings, or at least their understanding of it at the time. We're talking about a time when people thought that our body's functions were controlled by things like black bile and the humors. Now, supporters of this theory point to the 15th century European tradition of producing herbals, which were manuals detailing medicinal uses of plants. But here's the catch: not a single plant in the manuscript matches any known species on this planet. If it was meant to be a guide, why rely on plants that don't exist? Could the creator have intentionally obscured real-world knowledge, or were they depicting something else entirely? Perhaps it was meant to be secretive. Voynich manuscript also aligns with esoteric traditions of alchemy and the occult, which flourished during the time of its creation. Its diagrams of celestial bodies and strange mechanisms echo the kind of mystic symbols found in alchemical texts. Alchemy wasn't just about turning lead into gold. It was a philosophical and spiritual pursuit. The manuscript's cryptic language and bizarre illustrations could have been an attempt to encode knowledge intended only for the initiated, protecting its secrets from unworthy eyes. This theory ties back to figures like Emperor Rudolph II, who purchased the manuscript and was famously obsessed with the occult. Could the manuscript have been created to cater to the desires of the wealthy patrons like Rudolph, blending mysticism and pseudoscience into a tantalizing package? I don't see how this is completely out of the realm of possibility. If you look at the history of the Knights Templar or the Masons and things like that, having esoteric texts or hidden meanings behind things is a very common way to keep secrets. Now, of course, like a lot of people believe, this could all be one giant hoax. A hoax that was pulled by someone hundreds of years ago, and nobody's going to have a clue for the rest of human history. It was never meant to convey any meaningful knowledge. It was meant to troll people of the time and possibly people of the future. Some others suggest that it was just a hoax designed to dupe wealthy buyers. One popular suspect is Roger Bacon, the 13th century scholar and polymath whose name is linked to this document throughout history. Then there's also the possibility that Wilfred Voynich himself fabricates this. He's a bookseller, right? He stands to gain from any profit and reputation that this manuscript is going to create. While carbon dating it does disprove that he likely created this book, it doesn't completely disprove the fact that he could have altered it or added things to make it more mysterious. And that could have happened multiple times over the course of history, and we're never going to know. But there's one thing that the carbon dating did confirm. This thing is definitely from the 15th century, so it's hundreds of years old. But if this manuscript is a hoax, it is an extraordinary one, especially considering that it had to be done hundreds of years ago. The text does follow consistent rules, suggesting it was written following a pattern of intent, and whether or not the creator was trying to hoax either people locally or the entire human race, its creator would have had to have a deep understanding of alchemy, language, and photography. So this person would have had to be nothing short of a genius, especially 600 years ago. So whether or not it's a hoax is hard to say, but it almost seems for it to actually be true as a hoax, it's as unlikely as some of the other more extraordinary theories, or should I say extraordinary. And one of the theories is that maybe this book itself has extraterrestrial or futuristic origins. Now, maybe extraterrestrials landed on Earth, they were encoding our knowledge in a way that no human could possibly understand. Maybe they were studying this and left it behind. Or perhaps this is a book that came from another timeline or a future person who time traveled back in time, leaving the book for humans to discover and basically not understand what it is. The same way that if you sent a new Tesla vehicle back in time to a caveman, they're going to look at it going, what the fuck is this? As fun as the otherworldly theories are to consider, there's absolutely no proof of it other than it's something we don't understand. The thing, though, that kind of works against this is that, firstly, they were able to carbon date it, and it looks like it was made from materials from Earth, so you never know. It could be some kind of study guide aliens were using at the time. In my heart, I don't actually believe that to be the case, but I sure like to think about it. Anyhow, we'll move on. But because none of these theories, as far as they go beyond a theory, none of them have the evidence to back up or prove one way or the other, whether it's a hoax, whether this was created as some kind of secret alchemy guide that's attached to the cult. None of it has evidence behind it that we can use to come to any kind of conclusion, especially considering the writing that we see in the book matches no known language. So despite centuries of effort to crack this code, one person has tried more modern techniques and has come close at times. And his name is William Friedman, and he famously helped break codes for the Japanese during World War II. And he would turn his attention to the manuscript with unparalleled expertise, and if this guy couldn't solve it at the time, I don't think anybody could. But even with all the expertise this guy had in the world, he couldn't solve what this manuscript was trying to tell us. And linguists, mathematicians, computer scientists now have all tried to use advanced algorithms and AI to search for patterns in the text. Some claim to make minor breakthroughs, such as identifying linguistic rules or statistical structures. No one's come close to uncovering the manuscript's true meaning. Even AI, with its capacity to process millions of permutations, has fallen short. If this manuscript doesn't contain a language that we know or we've ever encountered, it's going to be almost impossible to solve. And that goes on to beg the question. If this is a book meant to convey hidden meaning, then perhaps somewhere out there to this day, there's a Rosetta Stone, so to speak, something that can help act as a cryptographer's key to unlock what this thing is trying to tell us. But the truth is, I don't think so. And I don't think anybody has a clue what this thing is. Nobody knows. And each theory, though it offers a tantalizing possibility, this manuscript truly defies explanations. Perhaps it's a hoax, an enigma with no solution, or maybe it's a genuine attempt to preserve knowledge, its meaning lost in time. Maybe its true purpose is simply to make us wonder. Or maybe it is cursed. Maybe this is a cursed document that causes obsession and the downfall of anybody that comes across it. I don't know. But for hundreds of years, those answers remain and have remained hidden. Now, the manuscript seems to demand obsession. Its pages tease us with the promise of knowledge just beyond our grasp. Cryptographers, linguists, and historians alike have all poured decades into decoding its secrets, only to find themselves haunted by failure. Many report sleepless nights, strained relationships, and careers that have been derailed by their fixation on this book. Why does it exert such a power over those who study it? Perhaps it's the idea that this could be the ultimate puzzle, a challenge that once solved would rewrite history. I'm not 100% sure what this thing is, but it makes me wonder if its intention wasn't exactly that. It was never meant to be solved. It was more of a sadistic prank meant to torture people who came across it. The writer, the author, knowing that they'll never solve it. And if the language is completely made up and has no relation to modern day languages, cryptography and AI are of no help to solve it even in modern times. So no matter what this thing was intended to do, it does seem like the one thing we confirm is it causes obsession. William Friedman, the codebreaker that I mentioned earlier, anytime he would go on to claim breakthroughs, each one would ultimately fall apart under scrutiny. Eventually, it was said that he sacrificed most of his life just trying to solve this. For over 500 years, people have been at this. I wonder if somebody will actually solve this thing one day, and I wonder if it's one of you guys. Seriously, somebody take a look, but don't ruin your life over this. But I get it. It's the allure of the unknowable, and the manuscript's refusal to be solved is part of its curse, and perhaps its greatest power. It reminds us of the limits of human understanding, forcing us to confront the possibility that some mysteries aren't meant to be solved. But for many, that is the appeal. But perhaps the discovery of new technologies, better carbon dating, and more powerful AI will be the answer. Maybe we will solve this thing one day and finally discover what its meaning was meant to be. Maybe somebody out there already knows what this thing means and is keeping the answer secret because we're not supposed to know, or the knowledge is too powerful for all of humanity to see. And that leaves me with one final question, at least for myself, and that is, what if the Voynich manuscript is meant to be unread? What if it is a type of Pandora's box that once we discover the meaning, it's only going to bring about our downfall? I don't want to know the answer, but man, I'm sure curious. All right, that was the Voynich manuscript. Up next is a strange tale about two green-skinned children who seem to appear more alien than human. The historical accounts in this story will make you question the world we live in. So stick around. The farmer froze, his breath caught in his throat. Near the edge of the wolf pits, tangled in the undergrowth, stood two children, gaunt and trembling, their eyes wide with something between fear and confusion. Their clothes were unlike anything he had ever seen. Woven from an unfamiliar fabric, it was loose and ill-fitting. But it was their skin that sent a shiver down his spine. It was completely green. The boy clung to the girl, barely able to stand. She, slightly older, held her ground. But her eyes darted between the farmer and the woods, as if weighing whether to run or stay. Their lips moved, whispering something, but the words made no sense. It was from no language that the farmer recognized. The farmer swallowed hard and took a cautious step forward. The children shrank back. He raised his hands, palms open, and asked, "Where are you from? Are you lost?" The girl whispers something in a language he had never heard. Not French, not English, and not Latin. The languages that ruled England in this time of kings and war. The words tumbled out, alien and unplaceable. He tried again, but this time slower. The children only stared. The boy whimpered and clutched at his sister's arm. Whatever language they spoke, it was not of this land. Standing in the dirt, staring at these impossible children, the farmer knew one thing for certain. They did not belong here. The village needed to see this, because there, someone would know what to do. He took another step, and the girl gripped the boy even tighter. And for the first time since he had laid eyes on them, the farmer saw something unmistakable in her expression. Not just fear, but loss. What had these children seen, and where did they come from? And centuries later, these are the same questions we're still asking. This is a gripping story that you're not going to want to miss out on, so stick around. Now, the farmer led them back to the small village of Woolpit. Word spread quickly. By the time they reached the heart of the village, a small crowd had already gathered. Traders, laborers, and housewives, drawn from their daily routines by hushed voices and urgent whispers. This was 12th century England, a land shaped by order and hierarchy, where every person belonged to a village, a trade, or a faith. But these two children, they belonged to nowhere. And Woolpit, it was a place of traps and legends. The village itself was small, unremarkable, except for the deep and treacherous wolf pits, which gave it its name. These wolf pits were dug to protect livestock from predators, but to some, they were cursed places, dark hollows where the earth swallowed what didn't belong. Fairy lore was not just a story, it was a warning. Traveler had whispered of strange lights in the woods or people taken and returned. And the church, it preached that anything unknown was dangerous, or worse, unholy. So when these two children arrived, looking as if they had stepped in from another world, the villagers only had two ways to explain it. Were they something unnatural, a trick of the fairies, or were they lost souls in need of saving? The village reeve, the local authority, stepped forward. They needed answers, but how could they understand children who spoke in riddles and from a language that nobody knew? How could they care for them when the boy was already weak, his frame wasting away before their eyes? What had these children seen before they came here? And more importantly, where had they come from? And was something after them? The villagers did what they could. The children were taken into the home of somebody called Sir Richard de Calne, a local landowner where they would be fed and cared for. But as the days passed, it became clear that something was very wrong. They wouldn't eat, no matter what was placed before them, bread, meat, or porridge. The children turned it all away. They clung to each other, silent, staring at the food as if they didn't recognize it as food at all. Until one day, a servant brought in a bowl of freshly harvested broad beans. For the first time since their arrival, their eyes lit up. The girl lunged forward, eagerly grabbing at the beans, but rather than eating them whole, she tried to open them the wrong way, fumbling with the stalks as if she had never seen them inside of a pod before. We said that the children actually tried to eat the bean stalks themselves, but when the beans were finally shelled and given to them, they devoured them raw. And as they ate, the girl grew stronger. However, the boy, he kept fading. He had been weak when they found him, and now, despite finally eating, he grew even more pale by the day. His green skin took on a sticky and sickly hue. His body was frail, and his energy waning. He could barely speak, only a few whispered phrases that only his sister understood. And then, after only a few weeks in Woolpit, he died. What made him so weak? Was it the journey that brought him here? Was he simply too malnourished? Had something about this world, the food, the air, or the very land itself, been fatal to him? The girl mourned, but she adapted. Slowly, she began to take in other foods, and her green hue would begin to fade. Over time, she began to understand more and more English words. And when she finally spoke, she would tell a story of where they came from that would only make this mystery even deeper. Now, as the months passed, slowly she began to share her story. She and her brother had come from a place that she referred to as the land of St. Martin, or in some accounts, St. Martin's land. Not only was it unlike England, it was unlike any land the villagers had ever heard of. The sun never fully rose, and it was said to be a place of eternal twilight, bathed in a dim and greenish glow. The girl reported that the people in St. Martin's Land were just like the English villagers, except everybody had the glowing green skin. The girl would report that her and her brother were tending to their father's livestock, as they had done many times. And one day, as they were following the herd, they heard a strange sound. They described it as sort of bells or a distant humming. In a moment of confusion, they were unsure of what happened when all of a sudden, they found themselves inside of the cave. Neither one of them could recollect how they actually got into the cave, but they would wander through it. And what seemed like days, even weeks, went by. They said that they followed a path that just kept going deeper and deeper, completely causing them to lose all track of time. At one point, they were struck by a blinding light. And all of a sudden, they stumbled forward, emerging into the field where the farmer found them. They tried to turn back, but the entrance, the way home, it was completely gone. The villagers sat there and listened in silence and awe. This wasn't just a story of lost children. there was something way stranger at play. Was this a real, hidden civilization buried somewhere beneath the earth? Had they crossed into the world from another reality? Or were these traumatized children recounting what hidden civilization they thought was true? Unfortunately though, despite multiple attempts, the girl was unable to recount any more information that would help them figure it out. But her story, once spoken, could never be forgotten. Now seriously, if you're hearing this story for the first time, what would you believe? If I was sitting there and a green kid came up to me, first thing I'd be doing is reach those because I'm thinking they're radioactive. But I just want to take a second to say, if you're enjoying this episode, please consider subscribing. And if you want to share this with somebody, it really helps us grow. And I won't take too much more of your time, so let's move forward. So moving forward, the girl's story should have been an answer. Instead, it only deepened the mystery. Where exactly was this land of St. Martin? Was it real? Hidden somewhere beneath the earth? In another dimension? Or was it simply a child's confused memory shaped by trauma and fear? Even today, no explanation fully fits. But over the centuries, many have tried to solve this mystery. For the villagers of Woolpit, the answer may have seemed obvious. Strange things lurked beyond the borders of the known. Stories of fairy abductions were whispered around fireside. There were stories of hidden lands that only the unfortunate stumbled into. Some believe the children had been stolen away by the fairies, trapped in a world that moved to a different rhythm of time and light, before being cast out, returned to the mortal world forever changed. Their green skin, their strange hue, their unfamiliarity with simple food. But if these children were actually fairies themselves, or just abducted by fairies, why were they brought back or came back at all? The fairies were known for taking, but not returning. There's a lot of odd similarities in stories about fairies and fairy abductions as to people who've encountered UFOs and UFO abductions. Just food for thought. Other villagers saw something even stranger in the girl's words. The description of perpetual twilight of a land neither fully day or night called to mind a world beneath the earth. Was it possible that she had spoken of a subterranean civilization, one buried deep beneath the rolling fields and quiet villages? If true, then perhaps the wolf pits themselves had been more than just a trap for animals. Maybe they had been a doorway to something deeper and more mysterious, something long forgotten. But if such a world existed, why hadn't anyone else stumbled into it? Nobody had the answers. The girl spoke of a glowing green river and a barrier of light that separated their land from this one. Some would later say that perhaps they existed in a different plane of existence, that somehow the children in Woolpit had crossed into our universe from a parallel world, a place that existed alongside us but remained unseen. And until an accident or a trick of fate happened, they slipped through the crack of reality and into our existence. So no shortage of supernatural theories have popped up to try and explain the green children of Woolpit, but that hasn't stopped historians and scientists from also coming up with their own explanations. So during the 12th century England, a war was underway. Flemish refugees, driven from their homes by violence, had scattered across the countryside. Could the children have been orphans lost and wandering, speaking an unfamiliar dialect that the villagers mistook for something otherworldly? Perhaps they'd come from a war-torn village, a place where the sun was blotted out by smoke, where hunger and desperation made them so weak they barely seemed human. Yet, even this explanation leaves gaps. If they had come from a war-torn land, why did the girl say she had never seen the sun? Why had she spoken of a world bathed in twilight, a glowing river, or people who all shared the same green skin? Some believe the strange appearance could be explained by an illness, a disease called chlorosis, brought on by extreme malnutrition. It was known to give people basically a pale green hue to their skin, and over time, as the girl ate with a proper diet, her color would fade, just like someone who would be recovering from deficiency. But that too was imperfect. If hunger alone had caused it, why did both children refuse to accept food? Why would they only eat raw beans? It was as if they had never encountered any earthly food before. It was like their entire way of life was built around something we can't understand. Other scientists and doctors would go on to suspect poisoning. Plants and heavy metals, and even certain soil conditions can lead to tinted skin, leading to a sickly and blue or green appearance. Perhaps they'd eaten something toxic long before arriving in Woolpit. something that had seeped into their bodies and left a mark that would only fade with time. But the reality is, none of these explanations really fit. And unlike a lot of historical stories and tales, there's a lot of witnesses to this one. What we do know is that witnesses report the girl survived, and over time, she adjusted to her new way of life. Her body recovered, her green tint faded like I mentioned, and she was even baptized and given a name. It was said that she grew into full adulthood and within the English society. Some say she went on to work in Sir Richard de Calne's household. Others claim she married into nobility, that her bloodline still exists today. But after her, no other green-skinned children were ever seen again. It was said that throughout her entire life, she never changed her story. She and her brother had come from a world without sun, land, or perpetual twilight, separated from ours by a glowing river of light. She never found her way back. And yet, she wasn't the only child in history to appear from nowhere, with no past, no home, and no explanation. Centuries later, another child would emerge, just as suddenly, just as mysteriously. Kaspar Hauser, a boy found wandering the streets of Nuremberg with no knowledge of where he had come from, speaking in riddles, and carrying secrets he barely understood. He didn't have green skin, but the story of his background is as creepy as the green children of Woolpit, and if you want to check it out, the link's in the video, or you can go over to the channel. Underneath it all, when we have to look at this story objectively, of course it's possible that the brother and the sister were just subjected to some horrible condition, ended up malnourished, traumatized, and delusional, and all the things that go along with that. That kind of seems to stick out with me in this story. On the other hand, it still seems like you really have to stretch yourself to believe that that's actually the case. But at the end of the day, this is just an eerie story corroborated by a lot of witnesses. However, hundreds of years ago, that's probably been changed multiple times throughout history as things are re-recorded and passed down. And the reality is, we're not going to get to know the answer. Not unless we're able to find these two radioactive kids buried somewhere in England, dig them up, and test their bones. Food for thought. If anyone out there's got a shovel, let me know. Thanks for watching another Complimation episode this week. I will be back next week with a new story, fresh out of the box, and I hope you're going to enjoy it. So see you then, and don't forget to subscribe if you like the channel.